Look now at the day's top stories around the globe. 9 European nations have joined the United States in recognizing opposition leader Juan Guaido as Venezuela's interim president. That's after an 8-day ultimatum expired on the weekend for President Nicolas Maduro to call a new election. At least 1 million Venezuelans took to the streets this weekend calling for peace and a stop to external interference. At least 35 people have been killed in political violence since Guaido declared himself leader last month. Over 1,000 people have been evacuated from Townsville as floodwaters keep rising in Australia's northeastern state of Queensland. Authorities opened floodgates on the Ross River Dam yesterday, but it's still at over 20% capacity. The area has seen over 1 metre of rain in the past week. Flood warnings are in place for several rivers in the region. The World Health Organization and Nigerian authorities are stepping up efforts to contain an outbreak of Lassa fever. 42 people have died since January. The viral hemorrhagic illness comes from rats and is endemic to West Africa. But last year, Nigeria reported a record number of cases, and this year the situation seems even more severe.
So in the first 4 weeks of this year, we've had more cases of Lassa fever detected. We had 70 cases in the last 2 weeks, consecutively more cases than during the same period last year. So we're now focusing on the response, focusing on supporting the states that have a higher burden, make sure they're well prepared to prevent, detect and respond to Lassa in our country.
Now, in June last year, ambassadors from the UK, the US, Germany, Switzerland and the Netherlands penned a letter to President Cyril Ramaphosa. They wanted clarity on South Africa's corruption and economic policy direction. And when the biggest international investors in our country demand answers, how do we react? How should we react? Besides this being a huge breach in diplomatic protocol, did the letter have a point? Can we afford to ignore it? It was 7 months ago now, so what has Ramaphosa done since then at the G20 summit last year and again at Davos last week? Finance Minister Tito Mboweni says it's been a rough ride.
Last year there was a lot of excitement about South Africa, that South Africa was turning a new chapter after 9 wasted years of the Zuma administration. And now we are here this year to re-emphasize once again that South Africa is on the path of renewal and growth. And I think that is an important message. And from the interactions that I've had here in Davos, I can assure everybody that our message is being well received, not without questioning, not without asking us difficult questions, which we have to answer, but I think the general reception is positive. Maybe not as exciting as it was last year, but most certainly welcoming and still a lot of interest in South Africa.
Well, to make sense of all of this, we have independent media group foreign editor Shannon Ibrahim in our Pretoria studio, Daily Maverick associate editor Brooks Spector and Solly Bopela from the South African Communist Party. Very good evening to all of you. Very good to have you with us. Let me start off with you, Brooks Spector. I mean, has Tito Mboweni, Cyril Ramaphosa been able to turn things around since this rather ominous letter?
Well, 2 things. I'm not sure it's an ominous letter because remember the origins of it. It was, in fact, a conversation with one of those investment ambassadors that Cyril Ramaphosa appointed some months ago. And that, as I understand it, was the actual origins of this. Someone took the conversation, turned it into a memo, and then sent it off to the president at the request of the investment ambassador or on their own stead, we don't know. But what's clear is this was 7.5 months ago. And in response to your question, that's a heck of a ship to turn around. You don't change its direction in half a year. But remember that this memo came about before all of these high-profile commissions of inquiry. Zondo Commission had not really begun. The Gupta hearings commissions hadn't really taken off yet. The nature of the discussion was how to improve the quality of bureaucratic dealing with investors or would-be investors, but add a further point to the mix that the ambassadors or high commissioners, in the case of Britain, the origins for their views were from consultations with their respective chambers of commerce. And those are the people who can tell you firsthand what are the difficulties we have as an investor or would-be investor in dealing with the bureaucracy, dealing with regulations or interpretations of rules that change or are, in some cases, not clear or too bureaucratic or not bureaucratic enough even, perhaps.
Okay, because they are important investors. They are our biggest in the country. And let's just take a quick look at the top 11 biggest investors. South Africa has attracted a total of 1.9 trillion rand in foreign direct investment by the end of 2017. And look at those staggering numbers, and the ones in blue are responsible for the latter, the UK at the top there. So clearly these are people that we have to listen to, Shannon Ibrahims, or not?
I certainly think, Jane, that we have to listen to the country's opinions when they represent 75% of our foreign direct investment. But I would like to add something that goes a bit further to what Brooks Spector has said. The actual origins of this discussion paper, or non-paper as it were, was not just something that was drafted in June 2018 and sent to many of the top officials and ministers in our economic cluster. It actually originated a few months before that, in March 2018, in the European Chamber of Commerce. And I'd like everybody to know that that is a small group of very right-wing people, probably less than 20, who drafted basically a memo that looked very similar to what came out in June. And these are people who have a particularly right-wing agenda when it comes to South Africa. And from what I understand from an informed source, the European Chamber of Commerce tried to railroad this through the bilateral chambers of commerce in those 5 countries, and most of them rejected that. But then we had a draft coming out that was sent to our officials about 3 or 4 months later. So I think that when the ANC gave a statement that they really reject the fact that this is the intervention of Western neo-imperialism, I do actually think now that one realizes these facts that there is something to that. Not that we want to reject out of hand all the concerns that investors have. And some of the issues that have been raised by these countries have been raised by other countries like China and many of our allies. And that is basically to ensure that we have a stable regulatory framework, we make it easier for people to get visas to do business in South Africa, and that we make sure that their investments are guaranteed. And
but as you say, possibly they bring up good points, but it's, the cluster of countries, the former colonists, do you think that's what's made it particularly repugnant for some people?
Yes, most certainly. I think we're extremely disturbed by this letter. We think that the issues that they are raising are important questions that are being addressed in the country, particularly the question around policy. And there's been clarity from this administration, including post-Nasrec conference of the ANC, regarding policy certainty in different areas, whether it's in mining, in different areas. The question of crime, for instance, has been attended to, and we've seen even the feasibility of the Minister of Police in trying to lead that particular campaign. The same as many other concerns regarding corruption, for instance. There's been huge interventions by the President to clean up.
Still, there's nobody in jail, is there? Well, at the end of the day, there's nobody in jail.
There are processes.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to walk the walk.
There are processes. I think you'll also know that that's why the cleanup process will not be an overnight thing. We've got the State Capture Commission. A lot of information is coming through. A lot of it has been followed. In fact, the MPA did indicate in the works that they are following up some of these things. On the one hand, we also have saboteurs who are still inside the system. And the approach that has been overarching, for instance, in the security cluster, we have seen even a commission established to deal with to review the state security agency and its work and all of that. So all these interventions are the best signals we can ever get. But to reveal
to push it on, the best signal is actually to put somebody in jail because...
Could I interrupt on this? One of the problems with the discussion so far, as it has erupted onto our stage, is that it is being seen as a government-to-government issue. It's not, really. It's the rules and regulations and the policies of a government making investment by outside companies either feasible, plausible, or impossible. It's not that country X, US, Britain, whoever it might be, the government doesn't make the decision on an investment. An individual company does, an individual board of directors or CEO. And when they look at the policy landscape and they see talking the walk as opposed to walking that particular path, then they say, I don't know about South Africa. Let's think about Thailand or Chile instead. And you can't wait until all of these laborious processes work their way through the policy committees of parties, the various intergovernmental agencies and committees. You have to begin to see some sort of resolution. Otherwise, a company makes its decision and looks away and goes somewhere else.
Okay. Today, a joint statement by these companies, and I'm just going to take a few lines from here. We made it clear that we haven't sent any official document to any branch of the South African government. What they're referring to is an informal discussion paper, and the discussion paper was intended to support South Africa's investment drive. Is that a bit of a U-turn, Shannon, do you think? What happened there? And also, how do you expect Cyril Ramaphosa to deal with this and corruption in his SONA address on Thursday?
Well, Jane, I think they've been quite clear, even in the original memo that they sent in June, which went to dozens of people, that they do support our country and our president's investment drive. They've made that clear. I think the part that people are upset about that smacks of arrogance and basically intervention is them saying that they want South Africa to ensure that it has an independent judiciary. But if you look at our judiciary, it's probably one of the most independent and exemplary judiciaries in the world. Then they say they want us to ensure that we have the rule of law, particularly when it comes to non-discriminatory and transparent processes with regards to tenders and procurement. But I have to remember what happened under the arms deal and how it was some of those very companies that were the ones who bribed our policymakers in terms of the basic tender practices. So I think the European countries are the last ones to lecture us on the rule of law. And the third thing that they raise is they want to have South Africa to have ethical business practices. Well, I think really why is it that they're picking on South Africa? Because yes, we have our failings and we have to root out corruption. Our president is absolutely committed to do this, and that's why we have these commissions, and then we will have the prosecutions. But we have to wonder, what is the actual political agenda here, and who leaked the document, this non-paper? Who leaked that to the media now, 8 months after the fact? And doesn't this have something to do with the upcoming elections and embarrassing the government at this time?
I'm wondering what you make of that, Sally, and also where you think this leaves the International Relations Minister, Lindiwe Sisulu. She was a little upset that she was left out of this whole conversation. I mean, how important is it to balance trade and international relations? I should imagine that's
very critical, of course.
An important balance.
Yes, it's a very critical area, particularly given that we are reliant much on this investment, and we need these investments. But they shouldn't be imposed in the manner that we then have to change our policy to suit them. We must change policy to suit the conditions of our country. And I think it's important that I do emphasize that some of the corporates that have recently been involved in scandals, corruption scandals, are from all of these countries, whether it's Bain, Steinhoff, S&P, Bell Pottinger, and so forth. Most of those are from those countries that have called for this intervention. So when, for instance, we took the question of the Guptas, in fact, they have been prosecuted. Some of them, because of the delays in the system, their case was trotted off. And that's why we've also called that we want to see some people going to jail to be accountable. So we're still committed to that particular process.
Okay.
But I think that trade and international relations are constantly interrelated. But
it's an important relationship, isn't it? We're going to have to leave it there. Sorry, Mapaita, Brooke Spector, and Shannon Ibrahim. Thank you. Now, after the break, all your sports news, and then why is the EFF targeting the new head of the crime watch body, NPA?